Hello everyone and welcome to the School for Business and Society. I'm Jacqueline Yu, Assistant Professor in International Business, Entrepreneurship and Strategy. There is abundant guidance on literature reviews, particularly for protocol-driven literature. However, the journey to successfully publishing these reviews often hinges on address certain nuances and details that are not as frequently discussed and emphasized in the literature. Today, we are extremely honored to have two distinguished guest speakers, Rob Dekkers from the Adam Smith Business School, University of Glasgow, and Chris Hicks from the Newcastle University Business School, to share their insights and practical experience in terms of how to manage and address these points so that authors might be more successful when submitting manuscript to academic outlets. They are leading experts in this topic with a wealth of experience.
Okay, so literature reviews are not something new. I don't know if you have done that, but maybe some of you have heard about the book that was written by Charles Darwin on natural selection. It is largely a literature review, because if you read his work, it says, if this is done by this person, and these are the conclusions, it means this. And it is full of these type of statements. And that is not the first one. There are also, if you look in the book that Jacqueline was referring to, in the book we have also a bit of history, and there were already calls in the 18th century to look at collecting evidence, as they call it. There's also awareness by journals. So when I was writing a submission with Eduardo Salgado on lean product development, the topic doesn't matter much. It was submitted to the International Journal of Management Reviews, which is a reasonable journal. And then in the first review, we got it back because I had asked Eduardo to write a positional paper because he had already done a literature review, systematic literature review, write a positional paper, and they liked it, but they wanted to know how and where did we get the sources. Right? Not even how we selected them, but where did you get them. What we're going to talk about today in this sense of being aware what literature reviews ought and should be, that is of course referring for a large part to the book. So the book is not written by ourselves alone, so there's Lindsay Carey from Caledonian in Glasgow, and Peter Langhorn is in the meanwhile emeritus professor in stroke, so in medicine. And in medicine, systematic literature reviews are a big thing. We're also joined by a number of contributors, including an aspiring poet. So that's also one of the first pages of the book is a poem and not a chapter. Furthermore, what is being presented today is heavily influenced by a special issue that I was running together with Pauline Found and Yang Cheng. Pauline from Cardiff and Yang Cheng from Aalborg in Denmark. And the idea was only to have literature reviews submitted to this special issue for a number of reasons. We received quite a number of submissions, 49, and 10 were desk rejects. But that left 39, and those 39 we have also analyzed, 37 out of 39. And we have presented that at conferences. One is more about the analysis, and the ICPR paper is about myths. And in the handout, I should not forget that, Jacqueline, there will be also these two papers attached, because that tells what actually people are, scholars of any kind are submitting to the journal. And that was quite interesting, I can tell you. What we're going to talk about today follows this agenda that is presented here. So it starts with review questions. How do you select sources? But we're not going to do the full protocol description because there was past year, I understood from Jacqueline, already a presentation about the protocol. So this is maybe at points different, but certainly things that are not addressed by current writings about protocols. And also, we shouldn't forget, it's about analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. I will come back on that later. Writing is crafting. That is not just out of the blue. That is really a problem, as will be shown. Chris will present some practical tips because he's super handy with searching. And he finds everything. And there will be some close-up with some final thoughts. And at the end, depending on the time, there is Q&A. So start with the review questions. If you don't have your review question right, there is no point in writing a literature review. And we have to look for that at the purpose of literature. What is a literature review about and also what it is not. But there are different kinds of literature review. So it's not just one way to do a literature review. There are many different ways. There are some starting points. There are some recommendations for review questions. And also you can get inspiration from standardized formats for review questions. So let's start with the first. A literature review is more than what you can read from abstracts. So if I go online, Google Scholar or Scopus, I type in a few keywords, I get journal articles, and I read the abstract. A literature review should be more than just reading the abstracts. And that is to do that you have to analyze papers. You have to put them together, which is called synthesis. And you have to evaluate whether the current stock of scholarly knowledge is sufficient. Right? So let's say that you have 100 papers and only one describes a certain phenomenon. That is not a very sound base to have conclusions, because it's always based on a sample, it's always based on a few interviews, which means by definition it's not representative. That also implies that in your review questions, you should never use the words overview, state of the art, development, or anything like it. One of the contributors to the book has called it topical surveys. And topical surveys means not going beyond the abstracts. That's what I can read online. If I read a few abstracts, I know exactly what is written. We got it in, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence, I guess, right? So already for a little while, there is a kind of artificial intelligence in the domain that we're both sharing. That's production operations management. And technologies for generating data, analyzing data have been used for a while. But you now got with Industry 4.0, which is a kind of artificial intelligence component in it, that you got a lot of articles which say, well, I'm going to look at what artificial intelligence is. Well, the Germans wrote that up in 2010 or 2011 somewhere, because it's a marketing term from Germany. And the conclusion is then, it is these technologies at the end of the paper. Well, I don't need to read a review for that. So that is the consequence if you stay too much in overview, state-of-the-art development alike, and some of the methodologies actually contribute to this. So this is an overview in terms of the different types of reviews. We have divided in 4 archetypes. So the archetypes are with the black mark in the middle of this picture. So on the left is the narrative overviews, narrative reviews, systematic literature reviews, and systematic reviews. And from the left to the right, it gets more complete. But it gets also more defined and more focused. So if you look at a narrative overview, that can be a justification for a quantitative study, for econometric modeling. Any economists here? No. So we can insult them. But a lot of the economic analysis looks at what is the literature and to derive constructs. That's a very quick glance at literature. That's not an in-depth analysis. A narrative review becomes more complete because then the arguments pro and con supposed to be in it, and an expert reading that will say, wow, that is really a reflection of what it is today. Then on the right-hand side, you find the protocol-driven literature reviews, which are then divided in systematic literature reviews and systematic reviews. Systematic literature reviews where the search strategy is defined, and systematic reviews where also the analysis is defined. So that is a very coarse dividing up of the different types of literature reviews. And then you got in this area quite a number of different reviews. So it's not even one type. So mapping, rapid, scoping, systematic reviews with meta-analysis, systematic reviews with bibliometric analysis, and also you got umbrella reviews. Those are reviews of reviews. And you know that I'm Dutch, drinking coffee. So in the book, we have 2 umbrella reviews about the impact of coffee on the human body. And they have collected 140 reviews and then combined it in an umbrella. That gives you a bit of an idea what is happening there. So I don't want to dwell on this too much, just to give you an idea that there is no one type of literature review, and even on the protocol-driven side, there are different ones. So you have to find interesting review questions. So these are a few possibilities to do that. You can go from the generic to the specific. So do you have a generic theory, nomothetic theory, and how does it apply to a specific situation? For example, although this has been done already, you got lean production from operations management, and that is then applied to healthcare. Right? So you say, well, lean production techniques and lean thinking are generic approaches. How can they apply to a specific context? From one case to another. So it has already been investigated, but you don't know how it works out in another case, which is slightly different. Getting causal relationships on the table, testing and falsifying theories. One of the examples, of course, both Chris and I are a bit more on the operations and production management, innovation, new product development, all those type of topics. So we draw on that more. So if you have a question, how does it apply to the School of Business and Society in a wider context, please raise that question. Spatial and temporal dimensions, for example, going back to this lean thinking, lean production in the Journal of Manufacturing Technology Management, there will be a study into lean production, the implementation of lean production by case studies, by only looking at case studies. And the authors there had the questions, are there certain pathways that need to be followed by production companies? The effectiveness of artifact intervention methods and tools, so that is a bit the traditional healthcare. If you're in healthcare, you want to know if a medicine is injected, is it going to help? But also evaluation from policies, etc., and looking at assumptions. The references are given on the bottom of the slides most of the time, and at the end of the slide pack, there will be a full list of references with all their details, so you don't have to look up what it means. Another way of looking is that once you have a review question, there are recommendations how to get it right. So what you see often is that those that write a publication, they have a number of questions that they ask. And if you look carefully, you will see that they are poorly related. The way to get around that is by taking a single guiding review question as starting point and explicitly mentioning this. That still can have then a few sub-questions, or corollaries as they are called sometimes, but they are more likely to be coherent than having separate review questions. Keep it narrowly focused, because the broader you go, the more you move to the left of the different types. Remember, who was the last person who knew everything? Faust. Dr. Faust. Goethe, the famous German poet. So this Dr. Faust appears in the play and can get all the knowledge of the world. But there is a price to be paid. What is the price to be paid? His soul. His soul, indeed. All right, so keep it narrowly focused. Clarity of constructs and formulation. So this is important. So when you see a lot of publications who start with an intro and say, well, this is what we're going to look at, and they start right away with the review methodology. Is there anybody here outside the traditional school of management domain? Just to get a bit of feel, yeah? All right, so I think it's the same because I did a quick look at Google Scholar for social work. It's the same as for business and management studies. Not very good. And that is to do that if you don't clarify the constructs, you cannot evaluate what you get as articles that you're going to review. And an example in this is, again, the lean production. Lean production has changed over time, but it is also in management science. There is a paper written by James March in 1991, Exploration and Exploitation. Yeah. Yes, see, Jacqueline recognizes that. And everybody refers to it. Yeah? And with the actual content of the paper is equal to BS, but not the BS from the business school. And that is to do with the fact that in this paper, he has two different simulation models to two different purposes. And for one, he says it's exploration, and for the other one, he says it's exploitation. But it's two different pieces that cannot be logically connected. Yet, James March is famous, so whatever he says is true. And here appears this paper in 2019, a review of studies using this exploration and exploitation. And these guys were a bit smarter because they said, we're going to define it. So they defined exploration as creativity. But they didn't check any of the papers whether they were using the same construct. So even when you do that, you need to make sure that whatever you define or describe plays a role in your actual analysis. Also different outcomes. We were just talking in the train about Robert Shea. Yeah? Robert Shea says, science is discovery. And if it is discovery of a phenomenon, then there is no predefined outcome. So there should be different outcomes possible. And of course, the assumption. You can also use standardized formats to inspire you. I'm not saying here that you have to use them exactly as they are, but in healthcare, you can imagine that. It's about population intervention outcome. So you want to know if a certain medicine or a vaccine works for certain groups of subcategories of human beings. For example, kids, right? So you could write kids, intervention, giving them a vaccine, and will they then contract less COVID? That is then the question. There are different variants, so there are at least 10, most likely. And there are also others. Context, intervention, mechanism, outcome for management science, for design in management science. Perspective, which is about complex interventions, particularly for the healthcare. And there's also one I found for social work. COPUS. And COPUS stands for customer-oriented, CO, P from professional, and ES for evidence search. So you can already see from my reaction that you have to interpret these ones with wisdom and not just take them directly as they are. That then informs search strings, which you use for exploring databases. And that can also be helped by what is called a logic model. So if you have a kind of model, that can be a theory, which provides a logic connection to the different constructs that are being used by you. In terms of the guidance that is available, particularly in the social sciences, including business and management studies, there's less attention for how you formulate a review question. They just assume that you have a review question that is suitable to the purpose, but that's not the case. you should always keep in mind it is about analysis, synthesis and evaluation, and that restricts the number of review questions that you can have to make it interesting. And in no case use topical surveys. So the next step is, although I'm not going to dwell too much in detail, but Chris will give some details how he does these searches, so that is complementary for part to this. About how to select. It's about relevance. You have to take care that it fits with the type of literature review and the purpose of your literature review. And it's also about effective search strategies. But in effective search strategies, there will be a few points that are not really mentioned in guidance. Basically, only relevant counts. Relevance is not limited to publications in academic journals. Right? It can be unpublished studies. They call them sometimes the file drawer studies. Can be professional publications. There is for one specific point in business and management that's about companies, how much money they put in R&D and how that is going to work out. There is a better empirical study done by a consultancy company than by academics. So why would you discard that publication? And this is also called the grey literature. And grey literature arrives from healthcare. So it's always about whether an academic journal publication or any of the other types has somewhere information relevant to what you're looking at. That can be a study in its entirety, but it can also be a fragment. So Marianne Kuku, you met also Marianne Kuku in Newcastle. So Marianne Kuku did it for customer involvement during new product development. And almost all the studies had it as part of their study. So they had observed there were customers, the new product development was successful, hence customers have a positive impact on new product development. But there was nowhere written what the customers were doing there. It could be they were just visitors walking around, or were they telling the designers what to do? We don't know about that. So that is so when you're looking for evidence, it can be sometimes part of a study. It does not necessarily to be the entire study. Citation rates and being renowned, the authors being known, does not count. It's the opposite. If you look at journal publications, often it is not written what the title of the person is. Because in academia, in principle, everybody is equal. So it's always about the contents of the study, whether they are credible and relevant to what you're looking for. But it is the most common misconception about how to select literature. Even the guidance sometimes tells it in the wrong way, so to say. So you have to ignore it. And I will tell you a little bit about why. Because if you look at citation rates, they are linked to the scientific quality. But if you have scientific quality, the scientific value is always one of the criteria. It is not the only criterion. And then the actual citation rate is also a proxy. That is never the exact value. For example, I'm using a paper published in 1994 about national innovation systems. Right? A bit of economist type of topic. In this paper, in 1994, when national innovation systems research was relatively new, they are comparing a number of countries. Germany, Japan, States, UK, etc. There's a limited set of countries. That is part of it. Then, based on these observations, they say, well, maybe there are two classifications of national innovation systems. They call them myopic and dynamic. The wording is not important, it's just two of them. And then they conclude their paper. This paper today has probably around the 900 citations. When I looked it up a few months ago, it was 880 something. So this will be 900 by now. Guess what it is more than half of the time cited for? You don't know the papers, paper by Petal and Pavitt from University of Sussex. They are also quite famous. It is more than half of the time cited solely for their definition of innovation. This interesting classification, how many times is that cited in the 900? Since past week, 7 times. Because past week it went up from 5 to 7, which has to do with this book that I was talking about, European Perspectives on Innovation Management, that I co-authored with somebody, and we mentioned it twice. So the most juicy part is not cited. Sometimes people cite a work because a journal told them to do so, to get it accepted for publication. That happened with me in 2007 when I submitted a work that was rejected by a journal. I got so angry. Why do they reject this? Yeah? I looked it up and I found 4 journals that were closer to the scope. I sent it on Friday with different styles of formatting of the list of references to all 4 editors. Saturday morning, I got a response from editor, please submit. Monday, I got 2 more responses. Obviously, the editors didn't work in the weekend. They said, one said, yes, you can consider our journal. And the other one said, maybe you want to add this to it. On Thursday, I got that's almost a week later, the 4th response. And the 4th response came along with this long list of citations that I had to include from their journal. I went for the first journal, as you can imagine. Rankings are an aggregation of the individual citation rates. So you have an unreliable measure, and then you aggregate the unreliable measure, and that doesn't make reliable. So at the end, the ranking of the journal is unimportant too. Remember that I made a mention about a paper on lean product development written together with Eduardo Socado. Right? And in the set of more than 200 papers that we reviewed, there was only 1 publication that had actual evidence about how lean product development worked, a specific component of that. And that is published in an obscure Slovenian journal, non-ranked. Should I discard it? It's the only one that provides evidence to some of the points that actually are claimed by others but never evidenced. So this turns the other way around, because that means that you cannot rely on rankings. So you have to rely on the credibility of the individual publication. But as I tell students when I'm teaching about these things, you cannot trust academics, including Chris and myself, because you have to scrutinize our work. That's part of the scholarly activity. So whatever we say is true and maybe not true. You don't know. So you have to look at the credibility of our work in the context that you're looking at and determine, is the evidence really the evidence that I'm seeking for? And that is called quality of evidence. So in the guidance, I don't know about social science because I could not find really guidelines for protocol-driven literature reviews, except in education. There is a lot of that. But even there, the quality of evidence is hardly considered. So you indeed have to look for the quality of evidence that is part of the cycle. So it sounds a bit ridiculous. It's a bit schizophrenic. that you have to look at studies because you have to accept in a way what they have been doing, but at the same time you have to be looking, oh, did they do it right? And even the conclusions if they are warranted by the evidence. How does it work then with the archetypes, the 4 archetypes? Remember in the overview of the different types of literature reviews? So a narrative overview is biased. It's always a justification, or it is a selection of constructs that has to be used, or anything similar. The point is, if you start to discuss the pros and cons, then you move into the narrative review, which is more extensive with regard to the arguments considered, but also should normally include the cons, the things that are against what has been proposed, or that don't work fully, or whatever it is, inconsistencies, incompleteness. For that, if you move in that direction, you have to really, really understand the domain. There are still publications today, we're talking about lean production. Lean production was written in 1990 for the American market first. In a book, still today there are publications writing lean production is new. 30 years ago, right? More than 30 years ago to be exact. Or in economics, Joseph Schumpeter, for economic cycles. Creative Destruction is written up in a German book in 1930 by Sombart. Right, so even Schumpeter doesn't get it fully right what Sombart has been writing. So always search for origins, critiques, and assumptions. So if you're investigating a topic, look always at the core constructs or core theories or core conceptualization, whatever it is, and search explicitly for critiques, origins and assumptions. And sometimes you have to use different wording. This is just for the slide summarized to these 3 words. However, you have to be careful because they can be out with the discipline. And for example, writing up with a few guys from the Netherlands about theory of agency. And theory of agency was developed as an economic model in 1973 by 2 different people. They have 2 different writings. And the theory of agency is used in management science a lot, in business and management studies. But the critiques are not from management science, but they are found outside it. For example, accounting and finance. They write only 2 or 3 papers that have critiqued it, but how long did it take me to find them? 5 days. But I found them, right? But it's worth it, because now we can deconstruct the theory and say, well, wait a minute, on which assumption is it based, and do these assumptions hold? So you have to, for protocol-driven literature reviews, you're looking at all relevant studies. That's the aim. Think about healthcare, where these systematic reviews are coming from. They want to have all the evidence from the world about the vaccines that are being used, whether they are effective, yes or no. In practice, you cannot not have all, so it's almost all somewhere. And then, even then, it depends on the number of publications. You've got random selections, stratified sampling, and maybe narrowing down of the review question is necessary. In healthcare, that is less of a problem, because I met one surgeon in the Netherlands when I was providing a course who was specialized in early births of kids. So when they are born earlier than expected. And they had 2,800 studies on this, relevant studies. These numbers are normal for healthcare, are more difficult in the sciences that we are working in. So in case that it happens, you have to narrow down, or you have to do sampling, identifying strands or subgroups, or do a random selection. Then the systematic literature review, most focus on the protocol for selection of studies to reduce publication bias. But there's a less systematic approach to the analysis. But that's possible because there are qualitative and quantitative methods. There are, I think, at least somewhere between 40 and 50 methods to do the analysis. Among them, the content analysis, popular, and the case survey method could be used. And the systematic reviews also define the analysis in great extent before even selecting the studies. It's also possible to have mixed methods. So if you have, for example, the bibliometric analysis, you can complement that with a thematic analysis. In systematic reviews, the most well-known are meta-analysis and bibliometric analysis. And meta-analysis is numerical calculation of an effect size, but the calculation is an estimate. In management science, and I saw it in social work also, they take that if you perform a calculation that it is an absolute outcome. That's not true. It's an estimate. It's always about estimating. How do we find those studies? Well, we have all these different types of studies. Even blocks can be used. So in information systems, there's a phenomenon that is called microarchitectures. And a few years ago, there was no publication about it in academic journals because it was so new in industry that nobody had had the time to do that. So this guy collected all the blocks on this topic and reviewed all the blocks. He was the first one to produce something on microarchitecture based on what others had done. So it extends to more than just professional publications and reports. There are three processes: identifying, locating, and retrieving. And a systematic search is basically only identifying. It only resolves the identifying part of it. And that's called the search strategy. Now, if you have a traditional search strategy, suitable for narrative overviews and for narrative reviews, you have an idea about what is happening, you start searching, you read, redo, and that cycle you go through, and somewhere you start also drafting your literature review, and you add on, and that somewhere you get, that was mentioned also by the challenges or the takeaways for today, you get a bit tired, fatigue it was called, and they say, well, stop, now it's enough, yeah? Now I have to wrap it up and produce a literature review. You can make it more effective by looking at the different concepts that are embedded in what you're looking for, using alternative terms, combining concepts. You limit the search or narrow down the question that you have in mind, depending on how many studies that you find. And you can enhance the search strategy by already mentioned origins, critiques, and assumptions. And then, if you're not 100% sure, you have to revise, or when you submit it to a journal, they may come back and say, wait a minute, you've forgotten something, or this needs to be addressed. The protocol-driven literature review follows this process depicted on the right of the screen. You start with the context, and then you define what you want to know from the literature review, set a review question, search, which is the green area, extract data, and then subject that to quantitative or qualitative analysis, and then you synthesize, right? So you see that here, nowhere the research gap is mentioned. When you do an empirical study, when you're reviewing your data and drawing conclusions, you say where it is stronger and weaker, and that is where you propose further studies. The same goes for literature reviews. So it's never a question in advance, it is inherent to the process that you follow. Points that get less attention in guidance. Search terms, databases, saturation for the search, which is different than what often is advocated, and complementary and data extraction, how do you do that? So again, when you see this name, Lynn Irvin is one of the contributors, and she's the biggest pool of that chapter, hence her name appears. Now, how do you find the search string? Well, there are constructs embedded in your review question, right? For those constructs, there are synonyms. So if you go back to lean production, I don't know why I'm taking that today as a target. Lean production, you can also call lean manufacturing. So that it can appear. It also sometimes appears as lean thinking, right? So you've got different terms for the same thing often. You can also consult literature on that and see what other people are using, etc., etc. Then you screen those initial studies. That's often also done as part of a review of scoping studies. You can identify keywords. And then when you have done that, then you can make your search string. But it is not so that if you have the list of words, that you have the search string. A search string is different because it has to be adapted to the database. You skip redundancies. So for example, if you have lean production, lean manufacturing, and lean thinking, what is the word to be used in the search string? Lean. Only lean. Because lean will automatically bring you to lean thinking, lean manufacturing, lean production, lean healthcare, whatever it is. So that is depicted in the figure over there. Sometimes it also works, which is not fully captured by this cycle, that once you start reading the articles that you have retrieved, that you come to the conclusion, hey, I've skipped out on certain search terms, and you have to redo that. That's a normal part of the process. Databases. Biggest mistake in almost all published literature reviews. Okay? You need at least 2. And you have to avoid publisher search engines. So the ones that are using Emerald Insight, Science Direct, Wiley, I don't know how from Wiley what it is called, Wiley blah blah, etc., etc. They don't do justice. How many publishers are there? I tried to do a count. I was moving in the direction of 200 publishers. If you're using Emerald and Insight, you have to use the other 199 too. Who's going to do that here? I don't think we're that. So you have to use generic databases. Lynn Irvin was so kind, I worked with Lynn on that, to compile an overview of all the generic databases, which includes databases and search engines for social sciences and business and management studies. There are also generic ones like Scopus and Google Scholar that go across disciplines. Then the most common mistake, I didn't do a count, but I would say a third of the published literature reviews have Science Direct and Scopus. Science Direct is owned by Elsevier, Scopus is owned by Elsevier, and the interface is 100% the same. The only difference is Science Direct is only publications in Elsevier, and Scopus is publications anywhere. I'm exaggerating it a little for the purpose. So if you use Science Direct and Scopus, by definition you have duplication. Right? So that is not. And then Scopus and Web of Science, principally, all journals in Web of Science are also indexed in Scopus. The purpose of using multiple databases is to prove that if you extend your search, you're not going to find anything of interest anymore. And that is called saturation, right? Now, saturation you can do if you have a given set of keywords and databases by either extending the keywords or by extending the databases. So if you go back to the lean product development paper, we have a number of studies that we have found through Scopus. We have a number of studies found through Google Scholar. And then we added EBSCO-host. In EBSCO-host, if I remembered correctly, we retrieved 26 studies. So that's the third database. And 25 we had already. So that means only 1 new. So that the likelihood, if we put another database to it, that we find a publication that we didn't find before is extremely low. Otherwise, you can use complementary search strategies. The most common ones are snowballing,,, and finding something by accident. Greenhalgh and Peacock are in healthcare, and they have a publication. It's only 2 pages, so it's not too much to read. They have used those 3 strategies together. And more or less, 1/3 is found through the keywords controlled vocabulary and database search. 1/3 is found through snowballing, and 1/3 is found by accident. So that shows a bit how powerful that can be. Then the data extraction. Doctoral students? The point is, for doctoral students, data extraction is a bit difficult because the guideline is that there are at least 2 people looking at a single study. That is called single data extraction and double data extraction. So single data extraction means one person extracts and the other person checks. And double data extraction means independent extraction and then comparing. And then you have to resolve conflicts and so on, but I've left that out. That's the details. Now, doctoral student, any of you intending to do a protocol-driven literature review? Yeah, you're doubting about. But you can do a protocol-driven literature review the advice is, of course, you're supposed to do independent work. So you can always get somebody to check, the supervisor or a peer that checks whether you have done it correctly. That if you apply it to a sample, you can get at least some feedback whether you have done it correctly. Also record the data, spreadsheet. So for the lean product development paper, I got it on my computer. You can see it after the seminar. A huge spreadsheet that's also published in the library of the University of Glasgow. That's online available, and where we have recorded all the data that we have subtracted. So if you read the article, if you read the paper about lean product development, there is nothing new. It's all written in the spreadsheet. Only it's not a story, of course. We made a story out of that. Increasingly, you can use that as a supplementary file. A supplementary file has the advantage that you have a full evidence chain. Right? And recently we were reviewing a paper where we couldn't trace the findings to which paper. Not even to which paper was specified. So we don't know if the finding was there or not there, or how many papers did write about a specific finding. No idea. Important in this all is after searching and after data extraction, it is about analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And this is how that can happen. There are specified approaches. You can support that by logic models. That was already mentioned before when we talk about the review questions. And there's also something called this quality of evidence, which already was mentioned when talking about the credibility, the ranking of journals, and the importance of citation rates, or the unimportance in a way. And then, of course, how do you get to the results of the review? Starting with the methods, there are a range of methods for literature reviews on the quantitative side. You can do meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is the traditional healthcare, the effectiveness of medicine, treatments, etc. So it's a bit morbid, but some of these studies are literally about how many patients survive and how many not. That is called the odds ratio. Then there's network meta-analysis. Network meta-analysis means I have studies that are comparing certain treatments, but there are missing links in the comparison, and there are ways to calculate that too. Best evidence synthesis. Who of the group is teaching here? I know Jacqueline is teaching, Chris and I. All right, so best evidence synthesis is about ranking treatments or interventions in terms of the results they give. And I'm mentioning about the teaching because in the book we have used another publication to rank learning methods by students, how effective they are. And highlighting, highlighting is the third most ineffective learning strategy by students. So if you want to help your students to perform better, don't let them highlight. All right, so look at the book. It's quite interesting in terms of what you can take away from there. There's also qualitative modeling, but qualitative modeling is not qualitative analysis. Qualitative modeling is a mathematical approach of modeling. All right, so that is slightly different than what you think it is. Bibliometric analysis, which is one of the traditional ones, but they all are limited in the way they can deal with variability. Right? So if you think about the vaccines, if you have a shot of a vaccine, effectiveness for COVID-19, that is pretty well defined. But if you start talking about the different variants, it's already getting more difficult. And if you start about talking vaccinations for coronaviruses, it gets even more obscure. And often these methods can only deal with a limited variability. And there's a systematic quantified literature review that is practiced in Australia a lot. Then there are also methods for qualitative synthesis. In meta summary, which is specific to literature reviews, but thematic analysis, meta-ethnography, grounded theory, and discourse analysis are also methods that are used in normal qualitative empirical studies. And there are mixed methods possible, quantitative and qualitative, depending on how you combine them, where either you segregate them, so you study something, use different publications, use different searches, sometimes even, and then bring it together at the end, or the integrative one, where some way, that's the arrow in between, the quantitative and the qualitative synthesis are connected to each other. Bibliometric analysis is very popular, at least in operations and supply chain management, service management also I've seen. It's a popular method. It actually doesn't do anything. And it doesn't do anything because the keywords are not constant. So if I have a publication in one journal and I have a publication in another journal, and it would be exactly the same publication, they would have different keywords in the different journals. And that's the reason is the following. Some journals, they have a predefined list of keywords. And no matter what you want to write yourself, you have to select from them. Then you have journals where you can select a few of their predefined keywords and then add keywords on your own. And then third, there are journals where the keywords are just free. You can choose any of them as an author and enter them. So when you're going to compare these three types of publications with each other, you can't, because they are too much varied. Then you get another problem, because some of the journals, they will have maybe in the predefined only the topics. And other journals will have the research method. So we had a submission to the special issue that was about trends in manufacturing, and trends in manufacturing was a case study. What? Case study is a research method. That is not a trend in manufacturing, right? So sometimes you compare apples and pears. They are not really related to each other. They are related, but not actually related. I don't know about you, but I don't care who has published something. Bibliometric analysis tells that some things are connected, but in fact they are not connected if you read the papers. So we had that with the outsourcing papers that we reviewed. There's another study. And there were people mentioning I used resource-based view. Okay, one source, resource-based view, one sentence, looking for the constructs related to resource-based view, 0. So sometimes people just do something, but actually don't do it for the purpose of the study. So that's why you need to complement a bibliometric analysis if you want to make it meaningful by a qualitative analysis of some kind. Okay, it is never sufficient if you want to advance insight. If you want to get published, some journals just accept that and are not aware of the fact that it yields exactly what you have already predefined, as I mentioned before. Meta-analysis is about effects. So if you're rehabilitating prisoners in their transition to social life, you could measure that effect as an example. But again, the variability has to be low, because the higher the variability, the lesser reliable it comes. And I come back on that a little later. To counter variability, statisticians use a random effects model. So today we are here. Yeah? If I sample 5 of you, this is just an exercise, right? Then those 5 are representing the group. But I can also choose another sample, but they are still representing the group. So if there is sufficient coherence in the group, the responses will be similar. They might vary, but that's just because of the different sampling. So you can have Bayesian models for that to counter that created. But the variability is actually no. But if I give this seminar here and I give it in Newcastle, there will be a different group of participants, because Newcastle doesn't have a school for business and society. Maybe it will be only the Newcastle University Business School. That introduces an additional factor in variance. And you can think about more, if you go to different countries, etc., different types of settings of teaching, and you're still talking about literature reviews, and you want to do a questionnaire about that, and you want to measure some correlation, you get variability. Then you have to do a random effects model. And the difference between all these type of models is just the way you weigh the different studies. So which study has a more important impact on the estimated correlation or the estimated effect size. If the variability gets too much, you can only do what is called subgroup analysis. Right? So you can't look at the total set of studies anymore, but you can only look at subgroups of studies. So going back to the early childbirth, 2,800 studies from different people, different surgeons, different academics. They have all been doing something different. And one says, well, you have to cut the umbilical cord immediately. And the other one says, well, it is better to wait and to first settle this. So the treatment is not 100% the same. Even if the outcome, whether the child survives or not, is exactly the same. So this variability then leads to only subgroup analysis. So with the 2,800, they thought they had an easy go on meta-analysis. You could identify just sitting at the table that they had to undertake at least 25 different subgroup analyses from the 2,800, and still this may not be enough in terms of the subgroups. So when you're doing a meta-analysis, although it is suitable for our domains, you have to study the statistical between study heterogeneity, it is called. So how much are those studies apart? And you can only do that once you have completed the calculations. So the 2 ways to do that, a funnel plot and I-squared. So I will explain both of you. In social work, I looked already in the journals, they have never heard of the word statistical between study heterogeneity. And in business and management studies, they use it, but they ignore the implications of it. So it is done, but it is not done at the same time. So otherwise you can do it supported by logic models. That is also a possibility to create a bit more coherence about the findings that you have. That can be analytical frameworks, the identification of causal relationships, theories. And the idea is that there is a holistic view, but you have to be careful because there are limitations to any type of modeling. So there's a famous saying about modeling that a model is never a replication of reality. So Wiener, one of the famous cybernists, has said one time, the best model of a cat is a cat. So that tells already the problem about modeling. But you need to look, again, I mentioned this before, into the constructs and the foundations before you do the review methodology. So in terms of writing a publication on literature reviews, intro, literature review before the literature review, and then the review methodology. Since you don't trust Chris and myself anymore, you have to look at the quality of evidence in our publications. There is no way out, right? And the credibility appears at the level of the individual study, but also at the level of the aggregated studies, so the synthesis at the same time. So the credibility is if the research methodology is appropriate, yes or no. So remember that I mentioned James March's 1991 exploration and exploitation, right? So what do our famous scientists do? They design a questionnaire. And what James March wrote in 1991 was there are certain processes that are suitable for exploration and there are certain processes that are suitable for exploitation without proper evidence. Scientists that use that construct, they devise a questionnaire, and one question is related to exploration and another question is related to exploitation. Now, if I conduct this study, I confirm the separation between the two activities. I don't add anything new. So I accept that the distinction between different processes is valid. Well, there's no evidence provided by James March. So Sejun Su, also publication, has investigated that as a systematic literature review, came to the conclusion that, I forgot how many papers, there was a lot, that almost everybody takes the exploration and exploitation as point of departure, and if you take it as point of departure, you always conclude that they are separated. There's no way out. But it is not evidence that they are actually separated in practice, because people just fill out the questionnaire. So this is the type of credibility that you sometimes need to investigate. Are they self-referential? Another example is about the paper in 2013 about the interface between new product development and manufacturing. So in the 80s and 90s, we are a bit gray, sorry about that. We're trying to hide it, but it doesn't work. So we have seen the age in which the modular design of products became practiced by companies. And companies did that because every time to make a specific product for a specific customer was taking too long. And also if you make it every time for a specific customer, you're more likely to make mistakes, quality. And also because of lead times, you're not sufficiently flexible in terms of which specifications you can cope with and which one not. So Dell, Chris's computer, was one of the first firms who was exploiting this concept and using it. Somewhere in the 2000s, two researchers get the idea we have to investigate the reason why companies are using modular design. What are their outcomes? Quality, lead time, flexibility. But it is inherent to the concept of modular design. So they did a study for nothing. Right? At best, they confirmed that there were companies doing it for those reasons, but it is not adding any new knowledge. So that is the self-evident. It can also be tautological. That's the exploration exploitation. If you separate constructs, automatically you'll find, by definition, because of the separation, you'll find that it is so. Over and under reaching of conclusions. Sometimes people underestimate the impact of their conclusions as well. So are the conjectures and findings rooted in an empirical study and evidence? And that is particularly with fragments. I already gave the example from Mariana Kuku about customer involvement and new product development where you have fragments. And the answer is to be given whether there, using this concept of quality of evidence, the stock of scholarly knowledge is sufficient or insufficient. Sufficient for practice, to use it, and insufficient maybe in terms of what it covers. In healthcare, this is simple, right? I don't see anybody say, yes, in healthcare it is simple. Yeah, in healthcare it is simple because go back to COVID-19. COVID-19 was discovered by a guy or made public by a guy in a hospital who later died. I forgot his name, so sorry about that, but he is famously known for the fact that he brought it to the attention of everybody. He was scolded at the time. That is in healthcare the lowest ranking of a study, because it's based on a case, or it is based on a number of case observations, but it is not based on a thorough investigation. The top of the healthcare studies is where you do a randomized controlled trial, or a controlled randomized trial. There are different names with different meanings. Don't want to dwell into the terminology there, but they are big studies where there are comparisons, right? So they give you the medicine, or they give you a placebo, and you don't know whether that is so. Those are seen as the most reliable studies. So they have a ranking of which methods are more reliable and which not. So they just have to look, okay, which type of study, which type of method, research method is employed, and that determines the quality of the evidence. Then there are a few factors that you have to take into account when assessing that, and that's it. But it doesn't work in management science, because even when we have case studies, not everybody is reporting fully, so the reporting standards are poor. Then every study is different, so you may have a case study, and there might be things pointed out in the case study that are not captured by questionnaires at all, so you can't compare the two together, which is different from the healthcare. So this is a problem for social sciences, including business and management studies. But you still must assess that. So still you must look at the individual level and aggregate it. On the right is a picture, if you want to know more about, got it in a supplementary site, which tells all the different ones. On the left-hand ones, you find the ones that are used in the healthcare. That's quite a number. Starting with grade is the most important one that is used for meta-analysis. But you got also on the right, on the far right even, you have to find something on your own to determine the quality of evidence. And for example, Marianne Cuckoo had to do that because there was no precedence in literature how to do that. So she made a ranking framework for the quality of evidence from 1 to 4. And she found that the studies are mostly on the 2 lower levels of quality of evidence. So that gave them also reason for her study. So that creating of a unique framework may be necessary in social sciences. And also what it should lead to is being explicit about the outcomes, findings and conclusions, the contributions to knowledge made. There's a study done, doctoral study, so there were a few of the doctoral studies. In half of the doctoral studies, the contribution to knowledge is not well articulated. And that's the same for a lot of studies that are published. The contribution to knowledge is often poorly stated. You have to include the confidence in the results, the recommendations for academics, practitioners, policymakers, and even citizens. So citizens are increasingly reading material too. The Lancet, heard about the Lancet? It's the most famous journal in healthcare. Readability for citizens is number 1. So sentences cannot be 50 words long, because sentences of 50 words long are unreadable for citizens in general. And they added for that. So it is not that what you write is just accepted, it has to be tuned that everybody can read that. Particularly for the quality of evidence and also for explicitly stating findings, conclusions, conjectures, etc., guidance in our domains are relatively poorly written. Okay, so we're first going to talk about what writing is not, then how it feeds into writing paragraphs, how you can write a better introduction, and also tie it together at the end. A literature review is not a collation of citations in text. Are we clear on what that means? Everybody knows what we're talking about here? I see some yes, but some I see doubting, got no clue. Who knows in the seminar room, because that we can see, unless there is a question about it, Jacqueline. Who knows what I'm talking about? Collation of citations in text? Nobody. So collations in text means the first thing that you get is a citation in text. Second sentence, citation in text. Third sentence, citation in text. Fourth sentence, citation in text. Fifth sentence, citation in text. Sixth sentence, citation in text. And on it goes. That is collating citations in text. Then there is cherry picking. Cherry picking is picking things from studies that are favorable to your arguments. But that doesn't mean they are good, because you didn't consider the quality of the evidence. Right? The third one is an annotated bibliography, or annotating a bibliography. That means that you have a paragraph. It starts the work of Dekkers et al. 2013 is, and there the whole description of the publication starts. Hicks et al. In 2020. That's the next paragraph. And it goes on by paragraph by paragraph. So you don't know how those paragraphs and how those citations are linked, because they are just rambling about an individual study. So that it is not. Right. And it's also not expressing an evaluation, because even if it's about the same topic, Chris's paper might be more useful than mine, or vice versa. You don't know that. That depends on the topic. So the suitability, the context, the relevance to the review question, the credibility, and how related to each other, that is what has to be expressed in an accessible manner for readers. And to achieve that, you have to structure your paragraphs. So a paragraph starts with an introductory sentence. And the introductory sentence normally does not contain a citation in text. And it ends with a transition or termination sentence. It's not from the Terminator from Arnold Schwarzenegger. It is an ending of an argument, and the reader needs to know what you think they need to know. So you have the kind of concluding sentence. And both are with citations in text, but for example, the paper that I mentioned with Sijun Zhu et al. About 1991 paper from James March, Exploration and Exploitation. Of course, there a few paragraphs start with naming his publication, because the whole study is about his publication. Then you have to embed the rationale for transitions. So why do you go from one citation to another? Why do you go from one topic to another? So at one time, a very lovely doctoral student, she was very clever, but she managed to jump in a paragraph of 200 words from economy, patents, individual firms, sectors, and it went up and down in a random order. If you're reading that, it's like throwing from one side to another. So you don't know what the connection is, and it was about patents, it was about the profits that they made, etc. It was about using patents, and it was about just submitting patents, all in 200 words. You can imagine already how that is. 200 words is about 2/3 of a page, A4 page. So you have to help the reader. You help the reader by providing a rationale. Why do I go from one topic to another? Use signpost wording. However, notwithstanding, in addition, these are all signpost wording. You have to include context. So this study, maybe we have a similar topic, but maybe Chris looked at make to stock, and I looked at engineering to order, which are different processes, although we can have similar findings. And these transitions also create your own voice, the way you embed that. And you can sometimes use surprising words. So one time I wrote about theory, I described the theory, and then the second paragraph I started with, despite these disciples. So I said in another way, in the previous paragraphs, they're all people in favor of the theory, and now I'm going to talk about the ones who are against the theory. Or surprisingly, we found. These are words that you can use and make it your own voice. And always check the readability, the logic and the flow for the reader. So this is what readers can expect, the cat, but not the model of a cat. The cat here means clarity, accessibility, and traceability. So clarity has to do with the clarity about constructs and the wording and how you describe things. Accessibility means that they can follow it. There are different techniques for fast reading. So you got a page, right? You can go diagonally across the page quickly, and that way you see the keywords and you can understand what the page is about. Another tactic is used, read the first sentence of a paragraph and read the final sentence of a paragraph. But that gets a little bit difficult because if I've said, say in the first paragraph, 1 point is, yeah, then you expect that paragraph to be about that 1 point. But sometimes academics, for a mysterious reason, in the second paragraph, somewhere in the middle, they say the second point. So if I have no time to read, but I want to find the paragraph with the second point, I only read the first sentences and I cannot find it. So structuring paragraphs, telling what they are about, is of extreme importance for the readers. That is accessibility. And in literature reviews, the traceability. So I got this beautiful paper on my laptop, 90 pages long, about mathematical models for networks. Typeface 6, letter size 6. So you can imagine how big this is. So if that one is referred to, and I have to read all the 90 pages to find where they got it from, that is not very helpful. So you have to tell the pages, you have to tell which sources have told that and how. At any point in the text. Cat applies to any point in the text. And the logic flow of arguments. And make sure that you keep in mind there are a variety of readers. So here is it how you can apply that. So this is a checklist for some of the points. Explanation of subject terms, logic of sentences, unambiguous citing. Unambiguous citing means that I have a sentence and I don't know exactly how that is related to the citation in text. So there's a reference mentioned, but I don't know what is what in the text from this citation. Reflecting the actual nature, so is it a conclusion based on evidence, or is it speculation by the authors? Okay, that avoids the cherry picking. You can check the readability, the Gunning-Fox index, so that's a calculation of words versus how complicated the words are, and avoiding points that distract. So one of the things that I don't like about literature reviews is when they are going to tell how many publications there are per year, or in which journals it is published. Because that is what you can throw in the bin. That's waste of space. Because we don't care about the ranking of journals. So why do we need to know about which journals it is published in? Why do you need to know it by year? Because it's always going up. We did with the outsourcing, we did a calculation. We found in a long period a 24-fold of increase in publications about outsourcing. And it is divided in 8 times 3. So 8 times 3 is 24. And 8 is because of the number of journals and their issues. So the publication opportunities have increased, and the actual increase in publications about outsourcing relative to the sources is about only 3. Accessibility, flow of thought, structuring paragraphs, reporting follow guidelines, Prisma, for example, and the traceability, the evidence chain that has to be presented. In supply chain management, they start always with a sentence cited from somebody else that supply chain management or supply chain whatever is important because competition nowadays is between supply chains. That is a BS squared. Because if that is true, it is illogic. How you're not buying from a supply chain, you're buying from a retailer, right? And business to business, you buy from another company. And it is a sweeping convoluting statement because it covers so many points that the point of the study is always only a small part of it. So it doesn't make sense. And often that is said by famous scholars and people just repeat it without using their mind. So start a first sentence, what your manuscript is going to be about, without repeating the title, because that is boring. Don't repeat sentences from your manuscript in abstract or in the title. And do not distract readers. So if you want to have a concise introduction, write first what the topic is about, supported maybe, and the relevance of the topic from a theoretical, scholarly perspective and a practical perspective. Then start a paragraph with however, because that is what you're going to talk about in the rest of the manuscript. And then about a third paragraph, the contribution to knowledge and how the manuscript is structured. And in an average in a length of paper between 7,000 and 10,000 words, you have to spend about 500 to 700 words on that as a guideline. Clearly indicate conjectures and findings. So the reader that is interested wants to know at the end of a paragraph what the finding is, or what the main point is that you want to carry on. And you can even number them. So the first finding is, the second finding is, and if you find them at the end of the paragraph, or it can be that part of the evidence that you produce reinforces the first finding. And that helps for the readers to understand what has to be taken away from your study. Discuss the findings. So about how they are related to the original review question. So do they really provide the evidence? So if you go back to the lean production, the case survey method, that was Anna who was doing that. And he finds, okay, we're setting out for pathways, but actually because they are more or less, even though sometimes the implementation is described cross-sectional in terms of the length of a path for introduction of lean production, we don't know what they did before and we don't know what they did after, and that is never described. And of course, the quality of evidence comes back and back, so you cannot trust Chris and myself, keep that in mind. You have to assess our work on whether it's trustworthy or credible, yes or no. Implications clearly stated, but also the impact of limitations on the validity of conclusions. So did you sample studies because there's an abundance of studies, or have you found such a variety that you can't make sense out of it, so that if somebody else performs or adds studies, it arrives at different conclusions?
I'm Chris Hicks from Newcastle University. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and cover some of the more practical aspects of doing a literature review. And I'm guessing that for some of you, you will be quite familiar with some of the things I'm going to cover. So basically, we're going to look at 4 topics. There's searching by keywords, and I'm going to have a look at how you actually do that. How you can import from databases, how you can create a workflow to doing your literature review, and also look at complementary search strategies. And we also have quite a lot of other things we might be able to cover that are in the complementary slides. So depending upon any questions that I might get, I might be able to adjust what we do quite a bit. So here's a screenshot of Newcastle University's databases. So you can see here, we've got a choice of quite a range of different databases that we can access through the university. I'm guessing that's pretty similar here at York, is it? Yeah? And you've obviously also got other databases that you might use, particularly Google Scholar. Now, before I go on a little bit more, I started my PhD a very long time ago, because unfortunately I'm quite old, yeah? And when I started my PhD, we didn't have these databases. We had a database that we could use, and we had to pay by the minute. And I spent £80 trying to search for papers that had the keyword MTO, make to order manufacturing. And I did the search, and every result that came back was on muffin tin orbital manufacturing. And none of them at all were on the topic that I was interested in. And I'd wasted 90 quid. And my supervisor wouldn't give me any more money to do other searches because he didn't think it was very helpful. And now what's happened is nearly 40 years later, the volume of publications has increased exponentially. The number of papers that were published back in 1987 was very small relative to now. And we've got this exponential growth. So we're really in a situation now where when we're doing a literature search and a literature review, it's almost like a big data problem. You know, you can do a search, and sometimes you can choose search terms, and you may come up with many thousands of articles in the list. And so we really need to have systematic, thought-through approaches to doing our research to manage that potentially huge volume. Now, these different databases, when you look through them, you can sort of see here that there's some of them, like Medline, for example, is a medical database. You know, as Rob mentioned, some of the databases are linked to specific publishers. Yeah. Now, the reason that this actual seminar today was organised was I was actually asked to do a review of a literature review paper. And I started to do this review, and I think another point that Rob made very well was when we're reading, we need to be very sceptical of what we read. Yeah. A lot of people, when they're writing, are busy and they don't read things properly. And sometimes when people are writing, they take shortcuts. So they may read a sentence in another paper that says Flogsworthy et al. Stated such and such, and rather than reading Flogsworthy, they actually just copy it. Yeah? And so you can get things that are wrong that can occur many times because people are copying something that's wrong because they haven't checked it. Yeah? And unfortunately, this is increasingly common. And I was actually, I can't give too many details, but there was a piece of work that I was looking at, and there's just a few flags went in my mind. This doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem right. So I then systematically got the literature that had been reviewed. I put it into a database, and I had on one screen, I'm really fortunate. In my office, I've got 3 screens. It's wonderful. 3 big screens. And on one screen, I had the document that I was reviewing. On another screen, I had my EndNote database. And in the third screen, I could click out the PDFs. And I could search for whether that statement actually existed in that paper or not. And often they didn't, yeah? And I've examined PhDs where I've found that people have citations that don't have references, where people are using the wrong citations. I've even reviewed articles for some leading journals that would appear as 4s on the ABS list. And again, they've had these basic logic errors. And it's because a lot of authors are being very lazy. Now, going back to these databases, some databases are selective in the sources that they look at when you do your search. So, for example, with Scopus, you can actually see the list of which journals they index. Yeah? Other databases, let's say Google Scholar, isn't really very discriminating at all. Yeah? So you can do the same search twice, and if you do the search in Scopus, there's a measure of quality assurance in terms of what your outputs are going to be. Yeah? So that the Scopus will only provide you with outputs that are from recognized sources. Google Scholar, on the other hand, will provide you with documents that have come from anywhere on the web. So, Rob mentioned citations. How many times has a paper been cited? If you look at Scopus, and let's say you pick a particular article and you have a look at it, you have a look at Scopus, and the number of citations is invariably a lot smaller than the number of citations on Google. And it's because Scopus is being a lot more selective, yeah? So these different databases will provide different results. And going back to this paper that I was reviewing, this review paper, the authors of the paper had used Web of Science as their chosen database. I checked the citations against the references, and then because it was a review paper, the authors had very helpfully provided a prisma diagram that showed the different stages of the search. And so because I'm skeptical, we're always skeptical, I took the keywords that the authors had used, I put them into Web of Science. The authors said, you put these terms in, you put in these date limits, I've followed their protocol exactly, and they said, this will give 762 papers. I replicated their search, and it came up with 1,200 and something, So I stopped reading at that stage. I completed my reviewer's report. I said, the search is not replicable. Major revision, that the authors should do their search properly. Anyway, time went on, and the authors resubmitted the article, and I was asked to review it again. And the authors had said, well, thank you for this helpful feedback. We've used Web of Science, and we've done the same search at different universities. And each time, the number of search results that comes back is different. And I thought, gosh, that can't be right. And so I actually contacted the librarian. And the librarian said, yes, Web of Science, it depends on the particular subscription that you've got. Yeah? So if you're using Web of Science, if you do the search at Newcastle, you clearly get a lot more results than the search that was done by these colleagues at wherever they were. And what the librarian advised was that Scopus is the most robust of these databases in terms of reproducibility. And also, Scopus is the database that is used when we have our research excellence framework evaluations. So Scopus is also the database that's used by the UK, the research assessment process. So I tend to use Scopus, and Scopus is a product of Elsevier, and Web of Science is a product of Thomson's Reuters, and these are two sort of major competing publishers. So, personally what I do, I use Scopus first because it's comprehensive. It's also not context specific, so you'll get similar results if you do it at York, Newcastle, University of Bermuda, or wherever you happen to be, yeah? It's used by the ref. I also like it because it links very well to bibliographic databases. So I never type in the reference details. I always extract them from the databases. You're less likely to get errors. And if there's things that I can't find on Scopus, I sometimes might use Google Scholar. So I use Google Scholar for content that's not found on Scopus. However, if you're using Google Scholar, you need to be a little bit careful because sometimes the PDFs that you get from Google Scholar aren't safe. Sometimes they've got viruses in and so on. So you need to make sure that you've got appropriate plugins in your internet browser to make sure that you don't pick up viruses and so on. Let's move over to Scopus. We're going to do a search. And you can see here that we can search within a wide range of fields. So we can search by article title, abstract and keywords, search by author, etc., article title. And how we do the search is going to have a very large impact on the number of hits that we're going to get. Now, the other thing I'll mention here, is that I personally use Firefox when I'm using Scopus. And the reason I use Firefox is often when you move through the process, if you use Google Chrome, for example, quite often Google Chrome will complain if it's got a HTTP rather than HTTPS. And our library system, quite a lot of the resources come from HTTP, and then Chrome tends to play up, whereas Firefox doesn't. There was a paper by Stock and Boyer. And what they did is that they actually took a definition of a particular term, I think it was supply chain management, and they picked out some keywords from in this definition, and they used these keywords as the basis of their search because they were within the definition. The reason I mention this is I've supervised quite a lot of student projects, and the students sometimes just randomly pick keywords to try and get some specified number of articles that they can review. And if you pick 4 keywords just randomly that have no association at all, you can usually get a particular number of citations that happen to have those keywords. And I actually played some games. I just put silly words like pottery, motorbike, and materials, and you probably find there were some papers would have those in. So really thinking about the justification for the keywords and making sure that the keywords that you're going to search for are sensible is really important, because obviously if you don't have sensible keywords, you might as well pack up straight away. So this is looking for these 4 words. So you've got marketing, logistics, production, supply chain management. And you notice here that I put this in quotations, which means that it has to be precisely that string. Those are the ones that Stock and Boyer used. I do that search, and it finds 1 article. Yeah. I then do the same search again, and I'm looking within the article, abstract, and keywords, yeah, instead of just the title, and then it's coming up with 105 articles. Very, very different depending upon how you do the search. So again, when you're doing your search strategy, you need to be very clear so the reader knows precisely what you have done. The other thing you'll notice here that it's got an export button, and it's got a box here. So you can click off particular papers, or you can click all, and then you can export. The export button's great because you can then import into your database, and you can get quite a lot of it automated. The other thing that's very nice here is this pane on the left is very helpful as well. You know, so you can narrow down by author or subject area or document type, or you can put in above here, you can specify periods, or you can specify a particular year, yeah? So the limit to the refining the search through this panel here is very, very helpful. This is illustrating an export. So here, if you click on the export, you can get different types of export. I would go for an RIS export, and you click on there first. The first time you set it up, you then choose what you're going to export, and then you get my settings. So this is what I personally tend to export. I tend to export the citation information, the bibliographical information, and also the abstract and keywords. So that's what I personally put in my database. This is my EndNote database. In fact, this is an empty EndNote database. You click on File, Import, you import the file that you've just exported, and then it automatically goes into EndNote. You can also set EndNote up so it'll have a go at finding the full texts. It might find about 20% of the articles automatically, but that's still saving you quite a bit of time. Still worth doing. You can also, on the edit menu, there's an option so you can set it up so that it automatically does the full text search whenever you do an import. You can also go into a particular one here, and you can attach the PDF of the full text, that you can get through the library catalogue. And what's really helpful is, again, Rob mentioned traceability. That, if for example, you're a PhD student and you're reading a paper now, and then you come back 6 months' time or a year's time, and you see that statement, and you know which reference it is, but that paper might be 30 pages long, yeah? It's really helpful to annotate the PDF and put some highlight in, and you can edit it in Adobe, and you can put comments in, etc., etc., etc. So traceability can be very much assisted by editing the PDFs. Another thing that's very helpful with EndNote is you can also share your EndNote libraries with other people. And that's great because it means that if you're working in a research team, it means there's only one person has to go to the trouble of finding the papers and putting them in the database, and then everybody else can pick them up. Which is particularly helpful for colleagues who live in universities or work in universities where they don't have very many subscriptions. Yeah, it can be very helpful to them. So you can see here that I have a range of colleagues who I work with, and they all have access to my EndNote database together with the PDFs. It's a pretty big database, 105,000 entries, of which I've got about just under 30,000 full text. Yeah, these things develop over time, and the EndNote also backs up with an online copy, and it's through the online copy that your authors or co-authors are able to share the materials. EndNote also integrates with Word, so it can automatically generate the citations in the text, and it can automatically generate the references at the end. You'll notice here that it's got the EndNote menu. This particular paper has the Style Applied Soft Computing Journal, so it's getting the references in the correct style, and it's also getting the citations in the correct style. And here is the auto-generated reference list. Now, I'm going to give you all a tip. Never trust it. Always check that your references are correct. Because sometimes what might happen is the EndNote style applied soft computing may have some particular type of reference missing. Yeah, so say PhD thesis is missing. It then means that if you've referenced a PhD thesis, that it just disappears, it doesn't appear on the list. Yeah? So you actually need to systematically check that all of the outputs are there, because they might not be. And you also need to check, you need to go through the reference list and check that the references are all correct, because sometimes you need to go in and edit, because sometimes the databases have errors in. There are some databases where it puts all of the title in capitals, for example, rather than caps and lower text. And so you then need to go into the record to make sure that you've got it in the correct format. You can see here that that particular paper I was working on was this one here, IPTS and GWO. And when I've updated the references in the Word document, it's actually showing that here. So all of the articles that are cited here are showing up in the list. which is really handy. And again, this is making the point about annotating the PDFs so that you've got a record of where the ideas have come from. This was the actual paper that I was reviewing, when this issue came up. And you can add labels to the articles. So each of these articles that was referenced by this particular submission, I added the label, and then I can sort my database just by that label. So I've got an easy way of grouping the references together that are used by that particular paper. Another way of doing that is to create a folder. And a third way is to produce a Word document where you actually copy, you actually add a citation for each of the references in the list. And you can do any three of those. A limitation of EndNote is you're actually limited to the number of papers that you can label. So it's quite helpful if you've got a small database, but if you've got a very large database, you can run out of labels eventually. So just to be aware of that. And that's the label there. What I'm doing here is instead of exporting to EndNote, I'm going to export to a spreadsheet. So I pick the CSV option. You can then import the CSV option into Excel, and you've got all of the information from the record comes up in your Excel, and then you can add extra columns. You might have a column for what keywords you've used. You can add columns relating to the data extraction that you're wanting to do associated with those papers. And I've actually got a standard template that I've developed for doing this, which is in the supplementary slides. You can also, Rob mentioned 3 ways of identifying literature. There was keyword search, there was snowballing, and the third one was serendipity. So one way of, if I look at a particular paper and I go into Scopus, on that paper, it gives me the list of the papers that have been cited in that particular article, So one way of snowballing is to move down the food chain so that we're looking at we've got this paper, which older papers has it cited, So that's one way of snowballing. The other way of snowballing is to look at papers that have cited the paper that I'm interested in. So we have both forward and reverse snowballing that enables us to go up and down the supply chain. You see this paper here, for example, Coordinated Supply Chain Management. You can see that it's been cited 984 times. You click on there and then you get the list of the 984. So this is how you actually get your snowballing to work. If you do that on Google Scholar, it might not be 984, it might be sort of 3,000-4,000, something like that, and it's a lot less structured. So I personally like to work within Scopus most of the time, although, as Rob said, you do need to consider saturation, and you also need to consider grey literature as well. Scopus tends not to be particularly good for conferences, government reports, company reports, etc. You're not going to get those through Scopus, so you may have to use other approaches to get those. I'm interested in lean product development, just say, for example, and I met this friend, Rob, and I know that he's likely to have done lots of work on a particular topic. So again, instead of searching for documents, I can search for the authors, and if I put Dekkers in, it'll find all the Dekkers in the world. I'm going to be a bit more specific. I know he's at Glasgow and I know his first name's Rob. Pop that in, and then I get some bibliometric information on Rob, how many papers he's published each year and how many citations he's got and so on and so forth. And then it lists the 52 documents, And again, I can import those into my database and I can get the PDFs through the library search.